And good evening, everyone, and welcome to another panel brought to you by the Alex Kirsch Project. If you haven't done so, please go ahead and hit like, share, and show me some love, and hit that subscribe button for more content. Panels on this platform will be happening every Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. This is a place where people of varying ideas and opinions can come together to discuss the issues I believe that need to be discussed. And when we discuss these issues, we do it in a manner where everybody gains something from the panel. Debates and disagreements could very well be inevitable, but all I ask is that all panelists please be respectful and limit the interruptions. So, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. So, the first panelist we have is Consul Folly, also from the TheBackTrackPodcast. We've got Tara Fraga, who's a friend of mine, and we've also got Anihilist. So, go ahead and have everybody. So, without further ado, everybody please go around ahead and introduce yourself. So, Consul, go ahead and go first and let everybody know where they can find you.
On the Backtrack Podcast. You can look me up at the Backtrack Podcast on YouTube and I think Twitch as well. That's me. I do political videos, that sort of thing. I also do streaming once in a while. But yeah, it's me.
Excellent. Tara, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Tara Fraga. I am an educator and aspiring writer. You can find me on Twitter and Instagram under, I think if you search Tara Fraga, there's not a whole lot of us out there, so I should be about the only one that comes up.
All right, Anihilist, go ahead.
I am Anihilist. I am on YouTube. I make videos of very low quality, and I'm a dirtbag leftist and probably underqualified for the panel.
Oh, don't go be so hard on yourself now. All right. So if anybody has any questions for the panelists, feel free to submit your questions and we'll be sure to get to them as soon as we possibly can. So let's go ahead and get right into the topic at hand. So the topic for tonight is education curriculum, going for broke to be woke. So now I, along with fellow panelist Tara, we graduated from the same high school in the same year. We had some great teachers, I must say, from our small town in Oregon. She and I share some of the same educational experience from the same high school, although I'm pretty sure she did far better in school than I did, right? We both graduated 20 years ago, and since then we have seen 2 wars, our economy has gone to the tank multiple times, and the quality of education has consistently gone down. Now, in 2007, Michelle Rhee, a daughter of South Korean immigrants, became chancellor of the D.C. public schools. At the time of her appointment to the system, D.C. had some of the lowest graduation rates in history. She came in with an iron fist, firing teachers and principals who didn't cut the mustard to ensure children were getting the quality education they needed to be successful. However, graduation rates is not the topic of discussion. The discussion for tonight is what is being taught, what should be taught in the education curriculum in order to make our society better, and do we need to go broke for being woke? Now, some of the biggest issues hitting the news as far as the education curriculum is the concept of critical race theory being taught in schools, Project 1619, the whitewashing of history, teaching only American exceptionalism, drag queen story hour, and the list goes on. There are people on one side of the political spectrum who think teaching a different language should not be promoted in schools. Some people think mathematics is racist. Some people think schools should stop kowtowing to the minority of woke people when they promote inclusive language like mom and dad, traditional family, and instead celebrating holidays like Christmas, teachers should just say, have a great break. Some people think we should make the Pledge of Allegiance mandatory, even throughout high school. Again, this list does go on. I only recently got my associates in the arts from the University of Maryland Global Campus, not meaning to flex here, and I felt like I learned a great deal about the world. As a matter of fact, I felt like I learned more about than I'd already known about different cultures and about philosophy in general. Humanities is a topic I think that should be taught in school as well, because I feel there's a lot that people just do not know about in regards to the rest of the world and how it operates to include the history of the world. On the concept of history, I think it should be taught in its purest form, for better or for worse. Even if it might make the United States look bad, I think it needs to be taught. In a conversation I had one time on the concept of reparations, one of the suggestions from this person was that there should be better representation of Black history, not just Martin Luther King and slavery, but some of the great contributions that Black Americans have given this country. That we should not promote Christopher Columbus as a great hero and founder of this country, but what and who he really was. I can speak from experience writing a program of instruction, also known as POI, which is Army jargon for a curriculum. Writing curriculum requires a lot of proof of concept and isn't just a snap decision to be enforced the next day. It takes time and a lot of man hours of research, writing, and formatting a body that a student or classroom can in fact comprehend. So, getting right into it, okay? So the first question I'm going to have for the panel, and I'll call on you and then you can give me your answer. is the American education curriculum going for broke by being woke? And I'm going to go to the educator, Tara. Go ahead.
Well, I think that we are having, I love that we're having a discussion about curriculum, because I was just doing some research recently, and they say the suggestion is, and there's some countries that do a national curriculum. In the US, we don't do that. School districts decide their curriculum. So I think most people know what a school district is, but it's sort of like, a county seat. You have a district, an area that's controlled by a body of admin, community members, parents, etc. So they're the ones deciding the curriculum. There are some loose federal guidelines. There are a little bit more strict state guidelines, but I think that it's really great that we talk about how we decide curriculum, because the studies are showing that a quality curriculum probably does more for student success than even like having a veteran teacher versus a first-year teacher. Like, that's how important curriculum is. And I think that the only problem is we're having the wrong discussion about it. It's all caught up in CRT, and you had a debate the other day about queer theory in school, and I think people are completely sidetracked by that, because they don't understand what it is and what it means. And I think they need to be educated about that, obviously.
Sure.
But it has to be a community effort, I think. Even if there is a more stringent federal guidelines about what kind of curriculum is taught, I still think communities need to decide, and that's parents, that's educators, that's admin, that is experts, whether it's in child development, child psychology. They need to be the ones coming together and saying, hey, here's what we see our kids need. Here's what we know is best for their success. I mean, that's going to be a wide range, obviously, of topics. I can't imagine anybody taking math out of the equation. Yeah. I hadn't heard that math was racist. I mean, as far as the humanities, I think we see some of that in high school. But what do we want our kids to know? Like, what is the core of being a good citizen and being a good human? I think sometimes we lose that side of things too when we focus too much on academics. Like, of course, kids need a basic working knowledge of language and mathematics and how to read and write, but also, like, is it important for them to know how to navigate the world and how to be decent humans?
But do you think like the American curriculum is going is trying to be woke too much, or do you think it's beneficial for people to learn these things that are so-called woke?
Right. I guess I got a little far from
that. Okay. No, that's all right. That's all right.
Yeah. No. I mean, I think a decent curriculum is going to be expensive, and people have to be willing to spend more for education. Now, does that mean this idea of wokeness? I think it means truth. I think it means fair and balanced. I think the word woke has sort of become like a little problematic. The right seems to like to use it as a put down. And I think the left uses it as sort of a checkbox, like, oh, well, I've got that one, under control because I, gave money to BLM or, whatever.
Sure.
So if we can somehow focus, like what you're saying, yes, teach the history, right? But let's not sugarcoat it. Let's not, sweep so much under the rug. And let's make it more inclusive, because let's be honest, like what you and I learned in high school was primarily written by white men, right? And it was about white men. There's a whole lot more history in the United States besides what was happening to white men. So let's tell some other stories, because that's overdue.
Sure. All right. Backtracks, what do you think?
Could you repeat the question again?
The question is the American education curriculum going for broke by being woke? Meaning, are they trying to just be too woke and teaching people about what it means to be woke, like as far as like, not really focusing on, It's like what Tara said, like when she and I were in high school, like a lot of the stuff we were taught was like predominantly by white people and it might have been whitewashed. So a lot of the stuff that we should be getting taught, like, do you think that they're trying to change the curriculum to be more inclusive and just by definition being woke? Do you think the American education curriculum is going for broke to try to get us woke? Do you think?
So I want to talk about like the word woke for a second. I would agree that the word woke has basically no meaning at this point, and it is entirely useless as a mark because it's just been used to such an extent it has no one really knows what it means, and it originally had a decent meaning of like breaking up to like the horrors of the world, if you will, and looking at how the world actually works and whatnot. But I'd say that there are instances where we've gone a little too far when we try to CRT. I've noticed, and maybe this isn't all of what it is, tends to lean a little bit too hard on homogenizing in the entire white population as just one entity that has the exact same psychology and acts the exact same way in social situations. And they don't do a lot to address Islamophobia, a lot of other issues that are very important, like xenophobia, which they can't have. If you are xenophobic, you can't have a reason for that, and we need to address that. But CRT doesn't really address that and sort of focuses on the idea of white supremacy, which is a problem, but it is a problem which affects a very small minority of white people. And maybe there are instances where other white people, I've seen this a lot, have like little small instances where they'd be a little bit demeaning, but I mean, honestly, it's not white supremacy that's the issue. It's just learning to be more, just being a part of the community and not being so alienated from everybody else and having this universalist, liberal mindset of, oh, this is how all culture should be, and this is how I am, so therefore everybody else must be similar to me. That's just not how the world works. There's not a universal morality or anything of that nature. We have to be very particular with how we actually look at these issues. So we have to be, it has to be at the community level, but it also has to be mandated at some higher level to make sure that community level is sane, responsible, and it's not, there's no corruption or anything or any bad teachers or anything of that nature. So that's kind of my piece on this particular issue.
Okay. Anihilist, what you got?
All right, so I don't think woke necessarily has no meaning, although it is very subjective what you could call woke. But I want to get to the point of the complaints about wokeness in schools, which is there is literally nothing that a conservative won't call woke, whether or not it actually is. So I seem to remember it hasn't even been 10 years since the last time fundamentalist Christians decided they wanted to teach the controversy in our science classrooms, teaching that evolution by natural selection is only one of the accepted scientific theories, and that intelligent design is also a valid scientific theory. It doesn't really matter how much you actually give ground to the people on the right. They will always push backward. So it doesn't exactly matter whether or not something's too woke or not woke. What really matters is whether we're telling the truth and teaching all of history. Now, of course, we are talking about curricula here. We can't teach everything to everyone at all times within however much time we have to teach everybody, especially when kindergartners are way too stupid to learn any of this. So it's all a matter of deciding which stuff to teach. And of course, this is where things get political. You cannot teach history without deciding what to teach. And if you decide what to teach, this will inevitably get political. Now, I can tell you from personal experience what I was never taught. And I went to a school in a relatively blue district, in a relatively blue state, I think, because the curricula are mostly set by the state standards, right? So I was taught that the Black Panther Party was like the KKK but black. That's a problem. I think I learned more about the Vietnam War from literature class and reading some stories about it than I actually learned in history class. I didn't learn really anything about Martin Luther King. I mean, I learned about like the letter from Birmingham jail, but did I have any idea he was a socialist? No. So it really depends on it really depends on where your priorities are. So when it comes to the actual facts of the matter, like we know 100% that this is the case, that there was systemic racism in the past. Yet people in Texas, I believe, or it might be Florida. I mean, they're the same to me, aren't they? They're trying to introduce a curriculum which strips out Martin Luther King, and it strips out basically the criticism of slavery as an institution. So what I'm trying to get at is there should be a debate on what we should be teaching in schools, but it's not like both sides of the debate are necessarily valid at all times. Okay. And yeah, that's basically where I wanted to start out.
Nope, that makes sense. So does anybody here think that, and then I'll just kind of leave this open, like first come, first serve. Does anybody think that, being too woke might actually do more damage than it would do good?
I would say yes, because it can alienate entire groups of population towards ideas of hatred towards other, or self-hatred, which is not exactly better. It's better to self-criticize than to self-hate necessarily. I think going too woke is just, first off, it's a little bit cringy, and second off, it can just be, it's just like not accurate to have the actuality of the of whatever you're teaching. It's just going way too far and going, that's all. I'm going to be redundant if I continue.
Sure.
Well, I don't think being too woke is a negative thing. At least I don't see it as like self-hatred. Mm-hmm. I was thinking more, and I think Nihilist had a great point as far as like what we can teach K through 12, because at least here in Oregon, the founding of the country, like the Pilgrims, Plymouth Rock, Native American story, all that happens in elementary school. So at that age, are you going to be telling kids the truth about like what we did to the Native Americans and that it was really genocide? I don't know. I think that might be a little tough for, I know when my kiddo was in, I can't remember, it was kindergarten. I'm pretty sure it was kindergarten. It might've been first grade. I'm pretty sure it was kindergarten. When they were doing the first Thanksgiving. And this is like, it makes me cringe to think about it, but they dressed up in the costumes, right? And they pretended. But this was like, so my middle kid he'll be 12 next month, and in like 12 days. So this wasn't even that long ago, yep. Right? And they were still dressing up in these like really awful, like stereotypical Native costumes and pilgrim costumes. And so that is problematic, I think, because that's still feeding into the stereotypes. That's still like, oh, it was a lovely meal and they sat together and they're best friends forever. But do we go to the other side then and say, oh, well, here you go, 6-year-old Jude is my kid's name. Here's what really happened. We came in, disease and war and, and then just driving them out. We killed, most of them and destroyed their languages, destroyed their cultures. I don't think that's too much. So obviously that's, I think, where states or and school districts, even federal government, probably need to step in and say, here's some parameters, here's what we think, here's what child psychologists say a kindergartner can handle as far as, that information. But I also think, that idea of, oh shoot, what was I lost it. Sorry.
It happens.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up because in a way you make a very, very valid point of like, how are you going to explain this to children? Because there are times like, for example, when you're a child and you find out that your parents had to put your dog to sleep, they have to very, very gently tell that to you. How do you explain something of what happened in a genocide to kindergartners or first graders? Genocide isn't even in their vocabulary yet. So how do you explain these things? But the thing is, like, at the same time, you could also kind of coax it into there in a way. It's like, well, yes, they did kind of gather together, but then bad things did happen in a way. I mean, I think you really have to, this is why it's so important for a teacher to understand the audience, know your audience, like, because at the end of the day, like, and Tara, I know you can vouch for this because I've been an instructor as well. Just when you know your audience, you have to know how do you keep their attention. You know, the people that I was training and instructing were kids that had already graduated high school and had already gone through basic training, and I'm sitting here teaching them how to do artillery ammunition. But what's the best way to capture their attention? You open with a funny joke, and then every now and then you open with another funny joke. Now, my funny jokes may not, work in a high school or middle school format, but they work, and that's all about knowing your audience. So I think in a scenario like that, it's important that a teacher understands, how am I going to explain this to kindergartners or first graders about what actually happened? That's the way I kind of look at that. I mean, what do you think, Anihilist?
Well, I haven't dealt with little kids for a long time, so I wouldn't be able to. I mean, I wouldn't be able to tell you too much about pedagogy or how to teach or communicate with little kids. I mostly just yell at a microphone in my closet and a lot of that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, so.
But
sorry.
do you think that kind of makes a little bit of sense, or just like, or do you think there's like another way you can kind of go about it?
Well, yeah, it makes sense, but I mean, going back to what I said earlier was that, well, it doesn't really matter how you frame this to kids. Some people will actually have problems with even the teaching of the genocide of Native Americans. Some conservatives might say simply that they're not ready to learn about this, and that you should just withhold that information until X amount of time later on. So even if we're talking about how we're going to communicate these ideas to little kids, there's actually it's very difficult to keep it from getting political.
That's fair. Before we go on to the next question, anybody else got a thought to add into it?
I had a few thoughts to add.
Go for it. Hit it.
Especially with how Nihilist is talking, and I think this happens a lot. But I think we have to remember that conservatives are not just political people, they're also people. And you also have to acknowledge the fact that you have to address their concerns, even if they are ridiculous and nonsensical. We have to figure out a way to work with them, because at the end of the day, they're not exactly half of our population, but they're a good chunk of it. And working with them is very important. Sure. One of my next points was that I watched a lot of videos on this topic. I don't remember enough about it to argue this point significantly, but Columbus specifically was not as bad as you make him out to be. He was sort of bad-mouthed after his death by the guy who wrote his autobiography, basically. I think that's what it's called. I don't know, but talking about a lot of shit about him and attributing events that didn't really happen under his command, if you will. But also there was a lot of issues even with that. Yeah. We also have to put that in a historical context and all that other sort of stuff. Also, the idea that the word genocide does include a cultural aspect, so it would actually be genocide. I'm not denying that it would be genocide, and it is genocide. Sure. It just is very important that a lot of people associate genocide with the Holocaust and very violent death, which is not necessarily the case. It is, and the guy who made the word genocide made sure to make it the point very strong that it is also about the dissolution of cultural and genocide. That specific issue. Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Good point.
Which can be a very interesting topic.
Oh, yeah, I have something to add. I think this may be something we might find some agreement on, that in the educational context, we should probably get rid of the word woke, because what even is woke?
Oh, yeah,
is
definitely.
Is teaching evolution woke? Is teaching sex ed and like the way our anatomy works, is that woke? Because some people would argue that we should just tell people to do abstinence only. Is teaching the definition of socialism and capitalism, is teaching definitions, or teaching the fact that that racism didn't exactly just end after the Civil Rights Act? To what extent do historical facts become woke? And how do we differentiate that from the ideology of saying, oh yeah, we must be anti-racist and so on?
I just picked it it's a nice spicy topic, so I won't lie. Yeah.
Well, and it rhymes, so that was a nice.
Well, yeah. Did you have something else, Consul?
I think so, but I don't remember it. So
sorry. If it comes to you, just let me know. So I'll go ahead and go into the next question then. So I think this is kind of relevant. I actually had this for a later question, but I'm actually going to ask it now. Do you think that the education curriculum right now is preparing students for the real world? So I'll start with Anihilist this time.
I actually don't know, so
Okay.
I'd have to pass on this one.
Okay. Console.
Do you think it prepared you for the real world?
I mean, to be honest, we probably should learn about some stuff that aren't in the curriculum. I can say this much, right? I think probably we should all be learning philosophy in high school at some point, maybe like a semester class. We should probably be learning at least a semester or a year of sociology, and we should probably be teaching like more substantially the way our future and our careers might work and career options. Like, for me at least, it seems like the obvious thing to do after high school is just to go to college, take on a bunch of student loans, and that's it.
Mhm.
But of course, I don't think we're equipping our youth to be able to make such monumental and life-changing decisions like this. Like, if you take a bad student loan, you could be stuck with it for the rest of your life, or somehow even beyond, I bet. So these are some ways in which I would say the education system might fail the students today.
What you got, Tara?
Yeah, I think those are great points. So you have a lot to offer, Anihilist. I don't know why. I think, so the question was, does it prepare us for the real world, right? Or are we preparing?
Yeah. Do you think that the current education curriculum is lacking in preparing students for the real world?
Yeah, I think so. One of the things that's been kind of driving me that's been driving me crazy
I gotcha.
about the curriculum focus and CRT and stuff is I wish that people were this upset about standardized tests, because I feel like those are a huge downfall of our schools right now.
Mm-hmm.
Because yes, we study and we take tests in college, but kind of the way things are going, I think more and more kids aren't going to choose to go to college. But even when you do, generally your tests you're taking are not like the standardized tests that we're taking in high school, even as young as, I believe the first we do state testing every year, but the first like Common Core testing, I don't know off the top of my head. It's young. It's an elementary school. Mm-hmm. I think it might be first grade, but I can't remember. And each state is different. But what's the purpose of that? It's not something that we carry on the rest of our lives. It's not like, when you hit 40, people are like, hey, it's time for your standardized test to see how you're doing at adulting. So I feel like that needs to go. And I wish people were as fired up about that as they are about CRT. Mm-hmm. I will say this, and Anihilist was kind of mentioning this too. There are some classes that I do think would be really beneficial to be universal. And I do think that high school should start, and maybe even middle school, should focus on some of the trades. Mm-hmm. And the problem that's happening, I see, at least here in Oregon, and I believe it's a national issue, at small high schools like we went to, Alex, that were 750 kids, 4 grades, we didn't have a whole lot of options, right? We had one language class with one language teacher. If you didn't like her, you didn't want to take Spanish, too bad, right?
She was kind of toxic, though, honestly. Like, I remember she flunked Spanish students, like Mexican students.
Right.
That's
I heard so many bad stories about her. I didn't take Spanish in high school, actually.
I did. So.
But then the high school I work at, which is the largest in Oregon, we've got French, we've got sign language, we've got Spanish too. I think it's just those 3. I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure. But we've also got a lot of trades. Like, you can leave the high school if you take the right classes with your culinary, like a license, basically, to like go straight into catering. So, and that's just something they have built in. It's there's also, let's see, they have shop, they have metal work, we have 3D printers, all these amazing, great things. My kid goes to another high school here in Oregon that's pretty big, but not as big as the one that I work at. And they don't have even half of what the kids at the school that I go work at have options for. So when Anihilist is mentioning, was it psychology? No, it wasn't philosophy. You can actually take a philosophy class at the high school that I work at. You can't take one at the one down the road where I live, where my kid goes, right? So it's just the bigger high schools. Obviously, there's more money because there's more kids, so they can offer more little high schools, they don't have that option, which is unfortunate. I think that we could be a little more equal in that. But again, like it takes money, and this is another huge issue. And especially with conservatives, they don't want to spend more on education. I guess they think there's a big glut, and there probably is some that could be trimmed. In my opinion, admin make.
But we'll get to that. That's actually going to be one of my questions in the future. So, do you have anything further?
No.
Okay. Consul, what you got?
Okay, I have a few things. I think this is something I've thought of before, but it's still relevant now. I think, and I've kind of always thought this, because there's no way to avoid it, called curriculum being political. Accept it. Be political. Have people debate. Have people have their opinions out in the open, especially with like being very free and open about all ideas, any idea and all ideas, even the worst ones like fascism and those other issues. Because if you don't allow that to be even spoken, then these people will just continue to have those ideas, and if they cannot debate them openly and outwardly, you won't even know that they have these ideas. So it's already a danger to yourself and others if they end up becoming violent because of those radical ideas. So making it political, trying to teach it from as neutral as a perspective as possible may not be possible. So you should have teachers, and this is going to be very difficult probably, but and you can do this probably better through online stuff as well, because we do have Zoom nowadays, and we do have places where we can have massive amounts of people who are not in the same room talking about certain issues. Have people who are socialists come and talk about stuff, and have people who are, but just broadly expand education and make it more for people to actually learn, not just certain skills and certain ideas, but also the ones that they're interested in. And I think England and broadly speaking, the European countries have that sort of system. I think it's time that we adopt something similar. I also want to bring up the point that I'm very staunch on. We should be teaching kids, and this is going to be interesting, not always at a young age, but how to harm reduction, like drugs and other stuff, and how to do drugs safely, because inevitably some of these kids will do drugs, and you need to teach them how to do drugs. There's this Dutch channel that's funded by the government, and they have videos where they do cocaine and they do all this stuff. They're very funny, by the way. I would highly suggest them. But they show you how to do this stuff safely. They tell you to always test your stuff, always do this other stuff. But that's also a very important aspect of being an adult, being a human, because you're going to run into these sort of things. And just teaching people to say no, well, it doesn't really work like that. You're not going to come to a situation when someone offers you drugs and it's going to be a yes or no situation. It's always going to be a friend or something else. It's going to be really, it's never a clean cut scenario like that. It never ends up like that. Let me see. Also, I had a question for Tara. This is something that I've seen a lot, especially in my days of schooling. Why do teachers never seem to go to the school their kids go to? Because that seems to be something that's very common. I see a lot.
You mean work at the school that their kids go to?
Yeah.
I think the professional family life, maybe trying to separate. I don't know. I actually went to the high school. Well, my mom worked at the school I went to for most of my growing up. It didn't bother me. A lot of it has to do with where the job is. I did work in the same school district as my kids for most of their, probably half their schooling so far. They're not done yet. But there wasn't a job in their school, although I liked it. So I have a baby on my lap. She's loud.
Okay.
But,
It's all right.
Extra panel.
I wouldn't mind working in their school. It'd be a fun way to check up on them. But and actually, I do know I work with people whose kids they go to the high school too. So it does happen. But I was gonna say too, that's interesting. I had no idea that what you said, Denmark, they were doing the drug video.
It's the Dutch. Yeah, I can send the video to. But it's hilarious. Like, I mean, and it has like 3 million views too. So a lot of people, the entire comment section is just hilarious too. One of the first comments, it's just like,
see that going well. I mean, like, as far as like from parents' perspective.
Oh
like,
yeah, no, but parents would have to be very. They have to be eased into that sort of thing, like actually talking about it, because harm reduction is very important. Having a buddy if you're doing psychedelics and other stuff, that's like absolutely essential if you're actually gonna be doing these things, which you will inevitably be doing, because some people, it's just a statistical probability. It's just a matter of time. But yeah, and teaching people the resources they can go to and all that sort of stuff, which is, I think, a topic that might be interesting to discuss.
Absolutely.
Yeah, well, I have a question about that. Is that woke?
Well, no, it's not woke.
Clearly, the war on drugs and the opposition to the war on drugs is connected to the idea of wokeness.
How so?
Well, I mean, the war on drugs, essentially, it seems to be that in partially, it seems to have started in partial terms to oppress black people. It like, if you look at the way it's enforced,
I said broadly minorities, especially Mexicans, when they made weed illegal. It's just any minority group, broadly speaking. But continue. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I'm pretty sure it was an advisor to Nixon who basically admitted that they did it partially just to oppress people who were minorities.
Mexicans.
Or who
yeah, he
were,
said
like,
something about Mexicans. That was really disgusting. Yeah.
Yeah, hippies and like anti-war leftists, and basically that's why they did it. And of course, that might be connected to the idea of being woke.
Well, I don't think we need to. That's my whole thing. You don't need to make connect to being woke. You can just teach it as a separate issue. It can be part of the already structured drug program, which is, it has its.
But how would we
flaws.
introduce it into the curriculum without conversations about it being woke?
You have what? Just discuss that. Like, it's just a matter of practicality. It's not a matter of. It is a matter of debate and discussion, but at the end of the day, it's a very important thing to discuss. And I don't think we should talk about how we get these implemented, because obviously that's not really our prerogative right now. We're just discussing these issues on a panel. But in our ideal world, or in our ideal scenario, these would be discussions that would be had and discussed, and we could figure out a program of which mostly satisfy everybody's wants and their concerns.
Those are all very, very fair points. But the main reason why I asked that question is because, like, the way things are taught is way different now. Like, for example, technology. Like, one of the main requirement classes, aside from language class, was another class called Consumer Survival. I'm sure Tara remembers that class. It was with Mr. Mills. So what they did was they taught you how to balance your checkbook. They taught you how to do your taxes. A lot of those skills I kind of deteriorate over time, and maybe it's just because I'm lazy, because I usually had, before I was married, I would actually have somebody else do my taxes for me. But it's just because I just didn't understand it enough. So that's the reason why I ask these questions. Like, are there skills out there? And I'm not saying that every child that is, like, everybody that's 18 years old goes out into the world and knows absolutely everything. That's completely absurd. I don't think people really have life figured out until you're like about between 25 or 30. Just because of the fact that you're kind of getting out there, you've finally broken the bonds of your parents, and now you're kind of finally out there experiencing life. Because when I turned 18, after I graduated, I joined the Army, and I just retired after 20 years, right? And I got a lot more life lessons from there, but I still contribute the fact that there's a lot of life lessons I learned in high school that actually helped me out there. Now, the reason why I asked this question is because there are people out there that are afraid that, children today, they rely too heavily on technology, or, for example, they're so immersed into social media, or, it's just some of the skills they're learning in high school or middle school isn't helping them out in the real world. And that's kind of like why I was bringing this up, because, I'm not, I've seen, okay, here's a good example, right? When I was at Fort Sill, there's like a spot near a network station where they give you government ID cards, right? Well, there's a marker out there that says, this is where Geronimo died. And I actually had a student ask me, wait, Geronimo was a real person? I'm like, yeah. And one guy, without missing a beat, said, I thought that was Latin for jump. I'm like, no, it is not Latin for jump. I mean, that's the kind of stuff. It's like, for some people it may not be important, but actually I think it is important to know who Geronimo was. But that's kind of my point as to why is this preparing people for the next stages in life. So, that's the only reason I brought that up. And I know it seems like, irrelevant, but I do think it's irrelevant because there are things that people are not being taught. Like, for example, in school, I was taught about Andersonville, which I've actually been to Andersonville, which is the Confederate Civil War camp where they kept Union soldiers. But I found out there was actually 3 camps that Confederate soldiers were kept in by Union troops. I can't remember the other two, but one of them is Camp Douglas that was in Chicago, Illinois. It's things like that that I feel like we are not learning enough about, which is I'm not learning enough about our nation's history, and it's not making me aware of what our history is. And so this is actually going to kind of play into my next question. When it comes down to history, do you think it's being taught correctly in today's schools? Consul, what you got?
Oh, absolutely not. But first off, I had no idea Geronimo was a person. I'm not even gonna lie to you, no idea. I am absolutely flabbergasted that's a thing. Okay, that's a little bit of a shell shock right there, but you know. Anyway, I want to bring the point that curriculum often lags behind of reality, and especially in the past decades, and especially with the administrative body and the teachers are usually a lot older and didn't grow up with this sort of stuff. So it's really hard to get an insight into actually what is this new generation? Like, who are these people? Like what is this new technology? And the technology has gone from the 90s to 2020, and just like that's like a huge difference in technology. And I think we just need to reevaluate the entire curriculum and just rework it, because it's an entirely different thing now. And especially with like the recent year, like last year to 2020, like the online classes and stuff. And I've heard that was pretty horrible and it's pretty bad, even from my personal experience and whatnot. And that isn't really adequate. I mean, obviously there's reasons for it, but it is what it is. Actually, that last year and 2 years ago as well. But we need to make a curriculum that is dynamic and adaptable and constantly changing and moving, which is a little bit hard because obviously the teachers also have to be constantly learning, but that is a way of keeping everybody interested, I think. So I think we set our curriculum up to, I don't know, to be particularly, because I might be speaking out of my ass here, but I think we set a curriculum and it's set for like 5 years or 10 years, and it just starts to be defunct. And also, to get your point about history, we're not teaching history correctly. We teach a lot of lies, a lot of misconceptions, and a lot of gross misrepresentations of certain events. And we need to take out our political perspective, like the liberal perspective, not the liberal perspective in the classical sense, just more in the classical sense, just of liberal democratic values and everything else, but teach it in a broader context that's not so focused on where we live and our particular perspective on these particular issues. But that's my piece.
Okay, Tara.
Yes. I think the issue with history in particular, we're talking about because they don't teach world history in the U.S. K through 12. It's all U.S. history. And then at least here in Oregon, we have, there are standards where they have to learn some specific state history.
Yeah.
And I think most states, as far as I know, are like that. So you're talking about 400 years of history in 13 years that you have kids, kindergarten through 12th grade.
Yeah.
It's a lot to bite off and chew.
Yes,
right?
it is.
And the problem is we're making history every day.
No kidding.
I know. So in the high school, they start at about the turn of the last century and they go up until as close as they can get to modern times. But honestly, and that's 1 year, because you get 1 year of U.S. history in high school.
Yeah.
And the bulk of what we end up spending time on is World War I and World War II.
Yeah.
Because they were pretty major.
Yeah, of course.
I think that if we can leave out, like Consul was saying, some of the bull crap, some of the folly, and we can focus just on the truth, whatever we're teaching should be adequate. We know we can't teach it all. I mean, like the Geronimo thing, almost daily I'm learning something about our history that I had no idea, and I'm like, why did I never know this?
Yes.
But that's just going to be the way that it is, because we cannot teach it all. And I think that the focus needs to be giving kids a taste for it where they want to learn more on their own.
Sure.
think that's something that we will take from these this year, a year and a half of distance learning, is that kids have had to do a lot of it on their own.
Yep.
And I hopefully now they have the skills that they and the desire to do some of that. I don't think that distance learning was all terrible.
Control F is your friend.
Yeah. Oh, and I was going to say too, there's places to work in history into other classes too. Somebody, oops, I guess that baby's gonna cry here in a second.
Yep.
Somebody was mentioning reading a book in English class. Was it about? I can't remember.
I think it was the Vietnam War.
Oh, is that it? Okay. And that was the first time they had heard about it. So I do think English classes should be doing that, and bringing that alongside, because obviously, like, a lot of our history, all of it, I guess, we get from books, unless it's film or oral history. Yep. But that's a valuable tool that we have, and also in foreign languages. When kids are taking foreign languages like Spanish, there's so much Mexican American history that we could be bringing into that, because learning Spanish isn't just about the language; it's also about the culture.
Of course. I mean, that's the one thing I definitely say is, like, when I learned Spanish is, like, it helped me work when I worked at the cannery, because there was a lot of people that didn't speak English there, but it actually kind of helped me harness my skills. But anyway, Anihilist, hit me. What you got?
All right, so I'm gonna give a hot take here.
Hot take.
And
here we go.
I'm gonna say that learning history by itself is absolutely useless. Like, a lot of the times I felt, especially early on, that I was just learning a bunch of fast facts. Mm-hmm. Like, what did the Great Plains Indians eat for food? Like, why do I care? Why do I care that they hunted buffalo or whatever? It doesn't really matter unless you can apply it to the real world in some sort of way. So if, for example, we say that that the buffalo, once the white people came and hunted all of them to death, which I don't know if this is accurate, I'm just saying hypothetically, that once they hunted all those buffalo to death, it fundamentally changed the way that the Indians had to live, and that could have been sort of a sort of cultural genocide. Or you could take, like, the idea to form an environmental message. For example, that if you kill all the food that you're supposed to eat, then there's nothing else that you can actually consume, and so you can craft that into sort of like a global environmentalist message. But early on, at least in school, I just thought, these are just a bunch of fast facts, and, well, I mean, not all of them are even true. Like, I remember Tara, you mentioned that we learned a lot about World War I and World War II, but then we learned a little bit about it, but at least for me, I don't think we learned all of the important stuff that we might apply to real life. For example, I had no clue what socialism or fascism really was, and I came out of high school not really knowing it at all. And that seems to be somewhat important. I was basically just taught socialism is when the government does stuff, and fascism is when the government also does stuff, but also really mean as well. And I mean, same with the Civil War. Apparently half of the American population doesn't even recognize that slavery was a primary cause of the secession. And it seems like, based on the way things are going right now, that in the future, in the history books, that January 6th Capitol riot will be taught in a similar way. There will be debates about whether or not it was actually Antifa at the Capitol riots. There will be debates on whether or not these people were heroes. Because the way we have it now, where the states and the state legislatures get to decide what our national curriculum is, we're going to have people who just don't even know the basic facts of the case. So this is an issue that basically it's basically fundamentally, like, built into our system. We can't get the facts right. We can't even get, like, the different points of view that some people espouse right. We don't even know what all these ideologies mean, and we don't necessarily always do a good enough job establishing a moral foundational basis by which we actually evaluate the truth and the different ideologies that people throughout history had. and I think we are getting better about this, that we're just mentioning and listing out facts for people to forget in a year or so. But yeah, that's basically my commentary on how we might go about just fixing this entire mess.
Well, it's a good point, honestly, because I haven't finished this book yet because it's such a heavy book, but I started listening to the Gulag Archipelago, and I actually,
Whoa.
yep, and
It's
so
a fictional book.
so when I found out about Operation Keelhaul, I was stunned. So for those not aware,
Can I bring a point about that? That book is entirely like fictional.
no,
I'll be aware of that. It mostly is. From what I've read about it, because I am an ML, that entire book, and not unlike a lot of books written about the Soviet Union, wasn't based on any significant history. When the actual Soviet archives came out, which these individuals, these writers, cited and said that when these records came out, they will tell the same story that I am. But when these records did come out, that simply wasn't the case. So that particular book, I have a lot of qualms with. But if you want to continue,
yeah. Well, all I was saying was that Operation Keelhaul was actually a real thing, where like there was people that defected from the Soviet Union, and we actually repatriated those people back to the Soviet Union. It's no different from when the Jews were escaping Nazi Germany and we sent them back. It's the same exact thing, except stuff like that I'm not taught about. It was not just us that did it, but it was actually the Brits that did it too. And it's little things like that where I don't know about these things. You know, we're just taught like in school, World War II, America came in, guns blazing, we saved the day. That's it. That's the end, right? There's actually a lot more to it. There's actually a lot that kind of plays into World War II, but we're not taught about these things. And, you know, Tara really kind of hit the nail on the head. You can't teach these things in a year because, for example, some classes only last an hour. Ours were like 90 minutes. Especially for a class of like 20 or 30 students, let alone the fact that you're trying to keep the attention of 20 to 30 students, it's really hard to do so. I tried teaching classes with 75 students, and it's impossible for me, you know, to keep the attention span of them. However, you know, try to make sure that people understand and you're following the curriculum, making sure they understand this is what's being taught, this is what you need to understand. You know, getting them to retain that information. You know, you'll get a lot of students. You'll probably get a lot of students that, you know, will get it. But some, there's like, they're not even really paying attention. But it's just, I feel there's a lot that we are not taught in history. We are taught only part of it. And that's kind of why I brought it up, is because there's so much about our own nation's history we don't know anything about, actually. And like you said, as far as the Confederacy, honestly, yes, it's written in their Constitution that they are guaranteed, like, nobody's going to take, you know, slavery away. Let alone the fact that, you know, that there's a lot that people don't know, that Andrew Johnson actually reneged on the offer of making sure that, you know, the slaves that stayed, once they were freed, they were going to get their 40 acres and a mule. Andrew Johnson reneged on that and actually paid the reparations to the slave owners for the slaves that they lost. We don't know about these things. We are not taught these things, and that's why it's so important for us. I mean, I don't care if it hurts my feelings. History is not meant to, you know, be all sunshine and rainbows. It's meant to tell me the history of my country, for better or for worse. That's just my only point. Before we move on, does anybody else have anything to move in on?
I have a little piece here as well. I think that first off, we should bring history and historical context into everything. For example, a lot of Darwin's work currently is being questioned because a lot of, as well as Gregory Mendel, because a lot of the stuff he did made assumptions that were unscientific and just, broadly speaking, doesn't follow the scientific method. And we're looking at genetics now and sort of reevaluating our position on it, which is a very interesting thing. Lysenko, I think, has a lot of stuff about post-genometrics. And I'm not going to lie to you, I have basically no idea what that means, but I am still trying to learn and look at that sort of thing. But I also think we should be taught how we should be taught to criticize everything we hear and critique everything we hear critically, in an actual critical manner, because I think a lot of the times we're just told to accept something as it is, as it's presented to us, and it should be instead encouraged to look it up, not only just look it up, but look at it critically and trying to look at it from other perspective, and also learn how to criticize the media as well, which I think is something that right-wingers do in their own special way. But I think it's still important to to do that, because there are things the media can lie about at a massive level,
Sure.
despite what we may believe about that sort of thing. But there are monetary interests behind those sort of things, and there are elites who do have a lot of money who can do these sort of things. So that's something to, obviously we're not going to teach that in schools, but
Sure.
you know what I'm trying to say, which
Yeah.
we need to be more critical in our actual teaching. Well, not critical in our way of teaching, but we need to teach kids to be critical in an actual critical manner, and challenge common narratives at every stage of development, I guess.
Sure. Anybody else got anything before I do the next question?
I was just going to say, I agree. I think, we can't teach it all. There's no way, but we can teach kids to be curious. We can teach them to be readers. We can teach them to think critically. And I have seen that being a push, at least here in Oregon, for about the last 5-10 years. This push towards teaching kids to analyze the text, to think critically. I think we could go a lot farther with it, because with the rise of, fake news and all that, and people believing everything they see on Facebook, obviously we have a ways to go. But although I will say that's mostly the older generation. But yeah, absolutely. Just teach kids to be learners, and we won't be able to get all of history in there, but at least we'll give them the tools that they can look at it, they can critique it, they can think about it, and learn about it on their own.
Absolutely. Nihilist?
Yeah, so when it comes to critical thinking, I think we have identified the problem that a lot of people just don't like to do it. But I mean, I think this might be connected to the fact that, for example, like, I didn't like to go to school, and I didn't realize really the value of school until I was basically like in 11th grade. Before that, I was just like, okay, we're just learning stuff, passing a test, and then we're forgetting stuff. Basically was how it is.
Yep.
I mean, we don't really teach, we don't even like show people the value of learning stuff. And of course, if this is something that I touched on before when I was talking about like the Great Plains buffalo analogy, but this is all something that we probably need to be teaching in the form of a philosophy class. For example, like we probably want to teach people about the basic concepts of epistemology, like how do we even know what is true or what is not. We probably need to teach them about logical fallacies, and have, as frustrating as it might be to have a bunch of people in our class running around identifying every single thing that you say wrong, it probably is a good idea at the end of the day. And of course, morality, like we might be teaching, even if we taught history in the correct way, and we taught all the correct facts, we just kind of take it on assumption that everything that we say will lead to the conclusion that X was bad or Y was bad. It might be important, I think it is very important, to teach basically the foundations of ethics. Mostly it seems like we just let the kindergartner teachers say, don't say anything if you have nothing nice to say, or like if you wouldn't want somebody to do this to you, then don't do it yourself. Like, and we think that's enough, I honestly think that if we established philosophy classes throughout the entire nation, mandatory for at least a semester in high school, I honestly think that we could probably solve like 50 to 60% of the nation's problems just like that.
That's fair. So I got
Which is why we got to get rid of standardized tests.
I agree. So I've got.
I was good at them too. I was good at tests. I liked them.
I hate tests.
Yeah, maybe they're
I just
not
think
the best thing.
It takes the fun and the creativity out of school, in my opinion. Teachers aren't allowed to be creative anymore because they've got to teach the test, and then kids aren't having fun. That's my experience.
So I've got 4 more questions, and we'll try to make them as fast as possible, but if you need to go in a little more detail, that's fine. Okay, so this is going to kind of go into the whole topic about the whole woke session, okay? So do you think critical race theory is, in fact, racist towards white people and is a means to inflict white guilt upon white people? Anihilist, we'll start with you.
Okay, so critical race theory, as far as I know, is basically a systemic critique. You do not critique individual white people for being white. But this is the thing. When you teach critical race theory or advanced concepts to people who are not ready for it, it sounds like an attack. When you say that whiteness is a system of oppression, what people hear is that being white means you oppress everybody else just because you were born with a certain skin color. That is not what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is not the same as recognizing that systemic racism existed in the past or that it existed today. In fact, it's just critical race theory is not being taught in even high school classes right now. It's a college level course. So I think the term critical race theory, it also basically means nothing. Basically, every term that could be politicized turns into nothing the moment a lot of conservatives latch onto it.
All right.
Yeah.
Tara?
Yeah, it drives me crazy whenever I hear about it, because it's when you're in the humanities mostly. I know critical race theory in particular started as a way to critique law and laws in particular, but we use it in history now and in English. I learned it when I was taking my English classes as a way to critique a whatever we were reading, a text, I guess I'll just say, but it's a tool, it's a lens to look at things. And critical race theory is a huge library of work. Some of it's really great, some of it's bad, but it's like walking into the library, picking a book off the shelf and saying, oh, this book is terrible, therefore the whole library is terrible. You can't do that. Yeah. Or another analogy that I like to use is like, think of it as a tool such as a hammer. Okay, somebody used a hammer to kill somebody, so does that mean we get rid of all the hammers? No, it just means that we use it in the right way. So no, I don't think it's racist. People have used it, I am sure, and I'm sure there's papers out there, because that's usually where we're going to see critical race theory is on a paper that's analyzing either laws that have been passed, or I used it when I wrote a paper on the Great Gatsby. So you might find it in a paper, but it's just a tool. It's just a lens. It's not a big scary monster.
All right, Consul, what you got?
Alrighty, okay. I have a few things. There's a lot of issues with critical race theory. There's the idea of homogenizing white people as a broader population. Which, let me see my paper here actually. First off, it's important to distinguish like racism from white supremacy, and a lot of what critical race theory seems to do is focus on white supremacy instead of racism, which can be an issue when racism can be a multitude of things. It can be between non-white people and other non-white people, between Mexicans and blacks and all this other stuff. And all these sort of things are important, but they're not really addressed by critical race theory. There seems to be a lot of holes and just valleys and large areas of this theory that just doesn't explain a lot of racism, a lot of racisms, if you will, and doesn't really go into any significant depth with anything other than white racism. And obviously there is a problem with white racism, as white people happen to be a more dominant race, broadly speaking, with regards to class. But that also isn't necessarily true, because there's a lot of white people who don't have those benefits, and white privilege is a thing, but we should put it in the context that there are poor white people who exist, and that's a majority of them. As we know, most of the wealth is at the 1%, not at the bottom. So it's hard to say that all these people have this white privilege. While they can use that and utilize it, it is important to recognize that. But it's also important to say that, well, a lot of them can't, because it's just an impossibility. You can't be the next Jeff Bezos because Jeff Bezos exists and whatnot and what sorts. That's kind of my whole thing with that sort of stuff.
All right, so
can I comment on that?
Go for it.
Yeah, so regarding homogenizing white people, I mean, I guess this is probably what you're going to get when you have a systemic critique like critical race theory. The basic concept is that people over large demographics and large amounts tend to behave in similar ways and predictable ways. It's not necessarily.
I would disagree, especially with white people, because can I interrupt you here? What's for 1 second?
Sure.
The problem is white people don't exist as a large group. In actuality, they exist in particular communities all around the United States of America. A group of white conservative women in Kentucky are not going to act the same as a group of white liberals in New York City. Okay, that is two different entire populations of people. You cannot use them as a homogenous population because they are not. There is a large diversity of white culture, if you will, or whites. Just even if it's not culture, it's a particular way of life. Either way, and you have to accept that and have to make the view of racism in that context, because white liberals are going to be racist in a different way than a group of white conservative women. It's just a different thing entirely. That's why you have to focus on the particular circumstances that these people live in and that these particular white people live in, or these particular racist individuals live in, rather than looking at it from a universalist perspective, because the universalist perspective often leaves out, like, if you will, microaggressions, which are real. They just, I mean, people take them a little bit too seriously, but it's just like, sometimes people be like, oh, I really like your hair, which isn't really racist. It's just kind of like, okay, thank you, I guess. But then some people be like, oh, can I touch your hair? I've never really had it happen to me, but that's something I've heard other people talk about. And it's just like, okay, kind of weird, but like, whatever. It's not hugely big issue, but you really do have to look at this from a nuanced perspective. You can't just be like, well, white people, broadly speaking, because they're the same, act the same way. It's not, because they interact with different populations in different ways. So that's my piece. Sorry.
Go ahead. Now let's follow up.
So I mean, what you talked about is basic. It seems to me it's basically you're advocating for intersectionality. That, yeah, sure, you might be
no,
white.
I'm not,
and
because the intersectionality implies a large.
Let him finish, please. Let him finish, please.
Yeah, well, you're talking about like white liberals in Los Angeles and then white conservative women in Kentucky. I mean, yeah, so being white is only one part of what makes them who they are. And of course, you have to factor in everything else. But that doesn't necessarily defeat the concept of critical race theory. The critical race theory is just when you apply this lens to one specific section of the population. So yes, you might say that people who are white may act in different ways, and there may be subpopulations of white people that also act in very different ways, but that doesn't fundamentally negate the fact that there is something in common with all white people, or the concept of whiteness, that does string them together and that does ultimately have some amount of predictable behaviors over large populations. Like the fact that the concept of whiteness even exists. What even is whiteness? I
was about to ask the same question. What is white?
Yeah, back then, Italians might not have been white. Irish people might not have been white. Today, are Jewish people white? I mean, they have been, and they're kind of losing their status as white again. Like Middle Eastern people, they've like kind of gotten a little bit of white status. And same with Latin people. They're considered white in some contexts, and they're sort of losing their whiteness in the recent years too. So the definition, by the very definition and the way that we define white and how that's changing is related to the way that that power is being expressed upon them. Now that we have a lot of xenophobia, it's becoming much harder for Latin people or Middle Eastern people to identify and be identified with whiteness. So the very concept of whiteness is one that cannot be extracted from inclusion and exclusion. And so when you're talking about exclusion, that might be a way that you talk about critical race theory, and that might be connecting all white people, even though white people or whiteness may change along with the times. The common factor of white being used as an exclusionary factor would be applicable to all whiteness, if you understand what I'm saying.
I disagree entirely. The idea, and you brought this up, and I've heard it, never mind. But yeah, the whole idea of whiteness being impossible to define makes this entire theory invalid, because then it's hard to define. Because I know, I heard this recently, Lebanese people, some very, very light-colored Lebanese people, they can be considered white passing. Is it that sort of context of white that matters, or rather is it, and obviously that's sort of the case, but also is it white passing? Because my sister, who looks very similar to me, although we're not really genetically related, she's sometimes almost white passing, and she's also a similar skin tone as me most of the time. But does that matter? It's sort of talking about like this abstract concept of whiteness. What is that? It's nothing. It's just sort of elitism that, in whiteness was sort of an elitism, obviously passed through slavery and racism and that sort of thing. It had nothing to do. It just happened to do with race. It has nothing to do with race in actuality. It just happened to embody itself as a concept in the form of race, as we define it today. And race isn't even really that much of a thing. Why would we? We shouldn't really see that much of the racial differences because there are not that many. It's more about culture and what we actually do and how we live that we should be focusing on. And it has a lot to do with what class we are, because obviously the slave owners were all white for the most. They were all white. And talking about that as a class of people, the elites at that stage were the white people, and even the lower, when slavery ended, there were sharecroppers, a lot of sharecroppers, not a lot of them, but a good amount of them were white, which was basically slavery without the actual labor of slavery, because you paid very little and you still had to live on the plantation and all this other stuff. But we should put that in the context of how class influenced that, and how class has influenced the racial relations, and the idea of racial relations that's been pushed upon us for a while, the racialization of people. It just sort of divides us, broadly speaking. We should celebrate culture and not focus so much on this abstract concept of race that clearly has no definite definition.
Yeah. So I know we could probably talk about this for like another few hours, but I actually do kind of have moved this thing along. But the question about what is whiteness is a very good topic, because people don't really understand like what whiteness really could mean, because I mean, for crying out loud, like the name Caucasian is derived from the Caucasus Mountains, and guess who's from there? The Chechens. And you definitely couldn't say that they are similar to me, honestly, because their culture is completely different from mine. Their religion is completely different from mine. I mean, that's kind of like when it plays into it. And that's where the knowledge about this topic is really, it could be important, it could be beneficial, but it could be difficult for some people that aren't willing to learn about it, honestly. But anyway, I got to move on to my next question. Okay, now, I'm going to pick Anihilist again just because he's been chomping at the bit on the Politically Provoked Discord. Schools have tried canceling books like To Kill a Mockingbird, Huckleberry Finn, Of Mice and Men, etc. Should books that have coarse, vulgar, and racist language be banned? Now, Anihilist, I know you're an advocate for being able to say certain words, but I'm going to ask you to not use those words here. But should books like that be banned?
Oh yeah, I would never go ahead and just yell out the N-word without checking on someone else's platform. But no, we should not ban any books. In fact, it's probably important for everybody to learn the fundamental ideas of ideologies that we might consider very terrible. So, if anything, so that we can understand what they think and then refute it. For example, I wouldn't mind our school curriculum requiring us to read a section of Mein Kampf. I would be very happy to see that our schools require students to learn the Communist Manifesto. Just because you learn these different things doesn't make it propaganda.
Mm-hmm.
And well, if it's To Kill a Mockingbird, there is literally nothing about To Kill a Mockingbird that promotes racism. There's absolutely nothing. Because the N-word was said one time, does that magically poison the air around you? Absolutely not. In fact, I think you would be doing a disservice to the entire work and to its broader message of anti-racism if you didn't say the actual word aloud in your reading, because you're distorting the art and the impact. Yep. So no, it definitely should not. You definitely should not use the fact that you're afraid of a word, which is just a bunch of sounds pieced together, to stop teaching a specific subject and a specific piece of literature that has so much importance in American culture.
Sure, I agree. Consul.
I feel like at the end there, you sort of demeaned what words are, because they also have historical context and other stuff. But besides that fact, I broadly speaking agree with you. I don't think we should really ban any significant pieces of literature. I don't really have an opinion on this. I basically agree with you. I mean, just because it has coarse language, I don't really care. I mean, it's just kind of this is gonna be how like reality is. So we shouldn't like coddle people and be like, well, these words don't actually exist because everybody thinks they're bad. No, some people will say them openly. But I mean, I guess I agree with you. So,
Tara?
Well, I spent 3 years running a library in an elementary school, and one thing about librarians is we do not believe in banning books. At least the majority of us don't. So when I've heard the controversies, my first thing is no, absolutely not. A few years ago, there was a big movement to try to get rid of the Little House on the Prairie books, and there's definitely language in there that's problematic. Sorry.
It's okay.
She's been quiet until it was my turn, and then of course she. But my point of view is, yes, of course, still teach the Little House on the Prairie books, but also let's bring in something else from a Native American point of view. Okay, so, and there's plenty of great books out there written from that perspective by Native peoples that we've never even considered or used in curriculum. So that's my go-to, and I think we all kind of agree. I totally agree with the nihilist. However, I guess I shouldn't say I totally agree. If I were reading Tom Sawyer to a class, I definitely would not be using what I consider derogatory language. I think, Consul, you're totally right, because words do have, yes, they're just sounds, but they do have power and they do have meaning. An example I have, when I was working in the elementary school library, we were doing a read aloud. And one of the books I was reading to the kids was on Harriet Tubman, and it kept using the word black to blacks to describe her and other slaves. And the kids that I was reading it to, I want to say they were 2nd or 3rd grade. One of them came up to me and she's like, "That's racist. Don't say black." And so it was actually a really interesting, because in her context, so this was a school that was predominantly Black kids, and in her context, when a white person was saying black, it was usually in a racist way. So when she heard me saying it, that was where her mind went. And so we had a whole conversation as a class to talk about, okay, do we say African American or do we say black? Some books are going to use black, and this one was written by a Black author, and I pointed that out. I said, this person is choosing, they prefer to use black rather than African American. Some people will prefer the opposite. I said, you let me know what you want, and we can do that. But when it's in a book, just understand that different people have different points of view.
Sure.
And I think that was a great conversation, and I think that we can have, kids are smart.
Yep.
They know they can have these conversations with us. I mean, like I said, it was 2nd or 3rd graders. In high school usually is when, well, maybe not high school for Tom Sawyer. I was thinking of, what was the other one we were just talking, To Kill a Mockingbird, that's high school.
Yep.
At that age, kids are certainly old enough to talk about like white saviorism of the book, or about like, the N-word being used. They're old enough for those conversations. So I don't think we need to worry about speaking down to them, or are they old enough to handle it? And we definitely don't need to ban the books.
Sure. Yeah. And I'm in full agreement, because like I look at these books as like literature. I look at them as, you can take these books for what they're worth, but honestly, it's just, there's a reason why they were written. It was to kind of give you a different point of view and to kind of see things from a different perspective. And I think that's really, really important. So, but I'm going to go ahead and move on to my last 2 questions, and I'm going to have to limit everybody to 2 minutes, and I'll let you know when you're down to 30 seconds, okay? And for this first one, I'm going to start with Consul. What are some classes that you think we should take away from middle and high school curriculum in the hopes of creating a better educated future? You can even mention college if you feel like it, but like classes that you feel like need to get yanked because they are completely pointless and nobody should be teaching it, essentially. Go.
Perhaps certain math classes, making those not a requirement to some extent or other, that might be important. I don't see any major ones, at least at the moment. I think expanding on a lot of them is more beneficial, and shrinking some of the other ones down. I think expanding on health, and obviously with drugs and other stuff that I talked about earlier. Mm-hmm. I think English, I don't know. I don't know about English. I mean, I don't really have, not cutting English entirely, no.
Yeah.
But I'm just saying, I'm just thinking, is there anything I would cut? Nothing comes to mind immediately.
Mm-hmm. Grammar.
To be fair. Yeah, I guess. But yeah, no, nothing really comes to mind except maybe cutting down math a little bit and some of the other stuff. But yeah.
Okay. Anihilist.
I agree that at least as far as high school goes, I don't really care that much if people learn like even pre-calculus. I wouldn't mind like cutting that out if I had to, although it could be useful eventually, I suppose. I think I've used calculus one time since I've left high school, like for real life, and it didn't work either. My answer was completely wrong. The other thing is, I suppose PE. I mean, like, come on, let's just admit it. Like, people are gonna get fat and they're gonna die. Like, okay, like, okay,
Morbid.
maybe we should just do something more useful with that time, and maybe like provide better lunches. You know,
Yeah.
like make better food regulations. You know, I don't trust people to take care of their own health anyway. Just screw them. They can just get fat, whatever.
All right. Tara.
I cannot think of a single thing that I would cut.
Well, adding is the next topic. So if you can think of anything that you would like take away from, like what would it be? I mean,
Wait, I
recess?
just thought of something.
What you got?
Perhaps homeroom. I don't know. It's kind of cringe.
So you can't think of anything, Tara? Okay. That's sweet.
Well, we do have this class called advisory, and I think most high schools and middle schools, do it now.
Yep.
I would get into it if the baby wasn't being crazy. But
Yeah. I got you. All right. So now my last question before we actually sum this thing up is like, what were some classes that you would actually love to see added to the curriculum in the hopes of creating a better educated future? And once again, you can't actually add college, but I'm pretty sure college offers these courses. But if you want to talk about middle school and high school, what class would you prefer? Or you can 2 or 3 different classes that you would love to see added to the curriculum. And, Tara, are you able to go first?
yeah, I think I'd just like to see more in the way of a course of study. So like in college, you take your course of study, you pick your topic, whatever you're going to
It's okay.
whatever it's going to be, and then you start down that path. You have to learn the core stuff, but then most of what you take,
It's okay.
That's my answer.
Okay. Console.
Probably some more advanced political stuff, or at least some more basic political stuff. Just learning about politics, learning about how to participate in politics. That's something that I think would be important. I think broadly speaking, applying history to almost every topic you talk about, talking about the history of certain things, the history of science, what we talk about now, if that's even accurate with what we talk about now, obviously with the genetic stuff I was talking about earlier, that's sort of relevant. But yeah, adding history to basically everything and teaching people a little bit about politics, just like broadly speaking, and not being afraid to be political, but also, I mean, it's hard because teachers can be not great and stuff like that. But, it's something that we have to work on, I think. It's my piece.
Certainly. Anihilist?
All right, so I think I've done a few spoilers on this because I've talked about this a lot. But yeah, basically four classes that I think need to be added. They don't need to be like all 4 years or anything, but the most important one is philosophy. In fact, I'd wager that we'd get at least a social democracy or a socialist society within like a couple generations if we implemented philosophy now. Sociology as well, that probably should be a semester a year. Technology, computer science, as much as I hate computer science and as much as I hate the fact that we have to do it, we probably have to do it. And then life skills, basic stuff like probably like just basic cooking, like balancing your checks. I was never taught that. Yeah.
I'm in full agreement with you. I mean, honestly, I think some of the most important classes that you could get in high school, you don't really always get because you get them out in the real world. Honestly, like consumer survival was beneficial to me, but honestly, I think it needs to be more in depth. Honestly, and I think other classes, for example, I think humanities is probably one of the most important classes I took because it really kind of helped you understand the culture all across the world. I mean, I've been to foreign countries. I've been to Iraq. I've been to Kuwait. I've been to Afghanistan. I've been to Kyrgyzstan. I've been to all these different countries. I lived in Germany. But like when I took the humanities class, I learned more about different cultures, different countries, and how they approached the conclusions that they did. And philosophy is also a good one. Sociology is a great class, honestly. And, you know, they talk a lot about morals. They talk a lot about ethics. I think it's, yeah, they talk a lot, all these things that, you know, it kind of gives you a good understanding about why it's necessary for us to learn these topics. Because at the end of the day, it's just, you know, it's kind of like what Tara said earlier. You have to create critical thinkers. You know, if you just create people to be drones, they're not really going to learn anything. They're just going to like, well, because this person taught me, therefore this is the word of gospel. People have to be able to see things from a different perspective and to be critical thinkers and to understand how can I overcome these problems. I mean, I think like problem solving is, you know, it may not necessarily be a class, but it's just like, I think teaching students about adversity can really kind of prepare them for the real world, honestly, because, you know, growing up, you know, from the time I was 18 all the way up until now, there were times like I felt like wanting to give up, and you know, it's just you could probably say that, yeah, you could have like a you know, a backbone or a structure or a foundation, people, friends, families to fall back upon, but some people don't have that option. Some people need something to kind of help find them purpose. I mean, maybe not may not be a class that you can really teach, but I think stuff like that, you know, teaching adversity, how to overcome adversity, is a real beneficial skill for people to learn from. So, but before I go ahead and close up, so I want everybody to kind of give their final thoughts about like tonight's panel, whether you learned something, you didn't learn something, or what you feel was beneficial from it, or just what you think about the overall topic in general. And we'll go ahead and start with Consul. What you got?
Well, I'm gonna have to go look up Geronimo after this, but you know, figure out who that guy was. Just absolutely blew my fucking mind. But either way, you know, there's some stuff that I don't know if I learned a lot of stuff, but I definitely expanded on. Well, I guess I did. I expanded on my knowledge that I already had previously. I think it's been a very constructive conversation. Mm-hmm. But yeah, that's sort of my piece, I guess.
All right, Tara.
Yeah, I think it's been a great conversation, and I think it's the kind of conversation that needs to be happening in, you know, school boards and town halls and such all over the country. Not fighting over silly things like CRT, but talking about what do we want our kids to learn, how are we gonna, you know, implement it, and I guess just the community being more involved, and also being willing to take the advice of experts, because they're experts for a reason, right?
Sure. Anihilist? Anihilist?
Oh man, I was muted.
I didn't mute you.
I clearly haven't learned anything. No, but I'm just glad I was able to stay out of rage mode and, you know, doing the blood sports debate thing.
Yeah.
I think having an actual educator here in the room allows me to spout some of my more hot takes, because, you know, Tara would probably, you know, reel me in if I started going too far. But yeah, I think this was a productive conversation.
I'm glad. At the end of the day, here's my whole entire thought about what's being taught in schools. People are going to have hot takes about what should or should not be taught to their children, regardless of what. You're always going to have that one parent. You're going to have that one person that's going to come in and saying this should not be taught to our kids because maybe they don't really understand it. And I'm sure Tara has probably encountered these parents. But at the end of the day, what people need to understand is like school is just a stepping stone. It's not necessarily the end all be all, which means there's a lot of things that people are going to learn in school that might make you uncomfortable. But then again, life is going to teach you a lot of things that's going to make you very, very uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, the way I look at this is that mankind has always been afraid of things it does not understand, and that even includes curriculum. People might be afraid of learning about critical race theory. They might be afraid of learning about the wars that we've had. They might be afraid to expand and think outside the box because of things they might be been taught at home. But honestly, you have to learn these things, because even if you just dump it at the end of the year, it might come back to you as like, wait a second, I learned about this. You know, this might actually be beneficial. I'm not saying that's a huge guarantee, but at the end of the day, we need to kind of understand is this. Once you leave high school, that's where your learning truly does begin. You're just being taught stuff where the curriculum actually plays into it. The people that are taught, that are paid to teach this stuff to you. This is curriculum that is well above their pay grade. They're being told, okay, you have to teach this. And then if something actually proves to be better, then eventually going to change it, but it's going to take a great deal of time. It's not something that's going to happen overnight. But people tend to be afraid of stuff that maybe they're not used to hearing about, which is why some people might need to give it an extra chance, honestly. And I'm not saying it's a perfect system. There's a lot that we have to improve upon, especially within the educational system. But however, I'm not a school teacher. Like I said, I just recently got my associate's degree after 20 years of not going to school like high school. I graduated from high school in 2001, and I just now got my associate's degree. But I've gotten kind of a bad excuse for it. But it's just, I felt like I learned a lot, even learning over a global campus about humanities, psychology, and I didn't learn it from YouTube. I mean, yes, they had it on there, but it's just like the teacher was able to put together a good lesson plan for me to draw and get an idea from. And I think that's where it really kind of comes into. And I really do think critical thinking is a very important part about making a good student, especially if the student is not fully understanding. It's the teacher's responsibility to make sure the student actually does understand these things. So at the end of the day, even if you don't really agree with the curriculum, you actually have to give it a chance, because it might be something that you could learn from later on the line, whether you agree with it or not. I mean, it's just, you actually have to give it a chance, because even if you don't like it now, they're going to find out about it anyway, and they're going to be wondering, why the hell did I learn this in high school? Why didn't I learn this in middle school? So if you could find a way to fit it into your curriculum, then by all means, just go right ahead and do it. I mean, it doesn't hurt to learn more. I mean, if you're afraid of knowledge, then you're going to be struggling in life. I mean, I just put it to you like that. So, but anyway, I just want to take the time to thank the panel for tonight. I just want to thank everybody here for your contributions, because it's so important for all of us to kind of learn from one another. I mean, even if some people say, oh, I didn't really learn anything, I feel like we kind of learned from one another and learned about each other's points of view, because we come from all different walks of life, and we come from all different parts of the country. So I just want to take the time to say thank you to all of you for joining in for me tonight. So, but, you know, as soon as I get down here, we'll talk real quick after this. So, y'all got anything else to say before we go?
Thank you. It's been great.
Fantastic.
It's been a pleasure.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks. And hopefully everybody enjoys the rest of the weekend. Good night.